everyone, this is Tanya with Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I create a landscape piece on this 8x8 watercolor canvas using the Caran Watersoluble Oil Pastels. Now, as you can see, I've created kind of a cheat sheet, so I'll know what to use for each area of this piece. So I have the sky, the trees, the ground, and the flowers. If you missed it, I do have an unboxing of my Caran set, and I will link that down below. I just did a basic swatching of the colors. I didn't really mix them, so I wanted to do that ahead of time to see how those colors went together, and now I have them in a little, I guess you could call it a palette at the side, kind of separated them out from my other pastels so that they're easier to get to while I'm working. Now I have picked up the lemon yellow, and that's the base for a lot of our greenery in this piece. This was in the springtime last year, and so I'm going to use that to kind of block in and outline the trees and the ground. I will also be picking up some Prussian blue because that is some of the dark areas that you see in the trees in the background, and that's going to help me block those in. I do not use a graphite pencil when I'm working on canvas. If I'm going to be doing acrylic, I will pick up charcoal or a charcoal pencil and work on the canvas. Or if I'm working, as in this case, on a watercolor canvas, I'm going to be using watercolor, then I like to use something that's not going to show through the watercolor should it get thin in some areas. So I never want to use anything that's really dark or harsh on the canvas. And since these are wonderful for drawing with, I thought why not just use the pastels themselves. So I do have the lemon yellow and the Prussian blue, and I'm just blocking in those shapes and colors. We're not going to be really careful on this first pass through. We are only going to get a wash on here, and it does seem strange to say a wash when you're talking about old pastels, but I don't have to color hard. It looks like I'm coloring hard, but that's just because I've speeded up the video. But I don't have to color hard. I don't have to be exact, and it's going to be okay when we put the water on if it all runs together. We are going to be doing this in 2 videos, and I think that will work best because this first video is going to be the basic couple of pass-throughs of washes, and then the second video is going to be all of the detail. And I do have a few tips and tricks on that, so I thought it would be good to have that as a video separate unto itself. So we're going to finish up here and get all of the yellow down. Yellow's a good base for those spring colors that you see in those trees and that grass, and now I am picking up I believe that was the yellow green, and that is going to go on top and again kind of separate the grass from the trees. And I'm going to just be working on layers like this, and once I get a good layer down of the colors, again, not being careful, I don't really care about the edges. If you've watched any of my other watercolor videos, you know that I don't tape my paper, so my edges are kind of ragged, and so I'm not really caring on this one. So I'm going to be quiet, and you'll see the colors pop up. I'll slow it down so you can see what colors I'm using, and I'll hop back on in a minute and talk about what I'm doing. For that sky, I'm using turquoise blue and gray. We'll use some white in there later, but right now we're just going to get that base down to put the white on. I've picked up some umber, and again, that's going to be a good color for getting those darks in the tree. And once we put the water on it, you'll see that all of these are going to kind of mellow out, and while they can still be lifted, in this whole process of putting down colors, they kind of stain the canvas. So that's why I want to put these colors on bottom. Now that we have all of the color down, I want to come in and add that water. And as you can see, I'm using those Royal and Lang nickel brushes, and I'm using my 3/4 inch brush here because it holds a lot of water, and I'm wanting to use a lot of water to kind of just activate everything. We're just worried about activating it. And I am going to go back and forth fairly often and rinse my brush, because like I said, we don't mind if these run together, but I do kind of want to keep them in their areas. I don't want the sky to be green, so I am going to rinse my brush as I skip from one area to the next. But where these colors are juxtaposition, I don't mind for them to kind of come together. So where the trees are from the background that were yellow, they kind of got over into that Prussian blue and umber. That's okay, because all of those colors are going to kind of work together. So we're going to get a good base coat on here. I am going to cheat. You're not going to see the cheating part, but I have a hair dryer handy, and I'm going to be very, very careful on a low setting and blow dry this, because again, you're working on canvas. So if you've never worked on watercolor canvas, that water does set on there. It takes a little bit longer to dry than it does on paper. So you want to be careful, if you're going to speed the process along, that you don't blow that paint straight off the canvas. The first layer is completely dry, so I'm going to go back and revisit those colors I used in the sky, the turquoise blue and the gray. And this is going to be the process throughout this piece. We put down the first layer, we're a little haphazard, we don't care, we're just blocking in shapes. We want to keep it loose because it's more of an impressionism piece. And now we're coming back with each successive layer, and we're being a little more careful about how we lay down the colors, because we are wanting to focus on getting those shapes really developed. And as I add a color onto each section, and you'll see that coming up here in a minute, I will go ahead and activate the colors in that area, and then I let that little section dry and I go on to the next section. And as you see, I've picked up my size 8 brush, so I've gone down in size of brushes, and you will see that as I move through this piece. Every time I add another layer, because we are becoming more exact with the placement of colors, we want to use a smaller brush so that we're more exact on what paint we are activating, because we will be working with smaller areas as we start to work a little more detailed on the piece. Okay, before this little section is dry, I have picked up the white and I'm going to color straight on top of the wet canvas. I want to kind of tone down the colors. They're bright, and those are the colors I need for the sky, but I need a tone. I don't need a shade, I need a tone. So I'm putting the white on top, and then I'm going to come back, and you're going to see that in just a minute once we get it nice and activated again with the water. Here's the water going on. I want to kind of drag these together and give the sky a little bit more texture. I don't want to see brush marks, and I can see my brush marks from activating things on here, and I want to smooth that sky out. So I have a flat brush over to the side, and you're going to see me pick that up and drag it across in one direction and kind of smooth everything out. Our sky is completely dry, and that's important because I'm going to be doing those trees in the background, and I'm going to be laying some colors on top of that sky. So I want the sky to be dry, and I'm going to be picking my palette here. I'm taking a look at all of the colors I wanted for the trees and wanted for the grass, and some of them overlap. The stuff I'm using for the trees I'm also be using for the grass, but I wanted to be certain that I had those picked out just for those trees in the background. So there we have some grass green, some of that light olive and a dark olive, and then I went ahead and picked up the Prussian blue. And we do have some dark spots in those trees, some shadows, so I needed that Prussian blue, and I'm going to start with that. And as I said earlier, as we come through, we're going to be a little more exact with each layer on where we put down the color. And I'm thinking about the trees in the background, and we know that trees have leaves on them. But as they get farther away, you don't see individual leaves, you actually see clumps. So that's what I'm doing at this point. I'm just putting in the clumps. Now over to the left, the upper left, the dark area is going to be a little closer to us than the ones I'm working on here. So in the end, you'll see me add some individual leaves, but not a lot. More like individual leaf clumps. You can tell there are leaves in them, but the ones in the background, you're not going to be able to see the individual leaves. So I am just doing some laying over of the colors, and just again doing some kind of juxtapositioned areas and shapes so that I can come back with that size 8 brush and just activate those areas. Now that that is dry, you can see we have a little bit more definition in the background. You can kind of see where the trees have little individual clumps. So we're using the same palette that I used for the trees in the background, except I am adding that yellow green because, as you can tell on the far left, the trees that come closer to us have a little bit of sunshine on them, and we're picking up a lot of yellow green. They have a nice yellow base, so that yellow green will go nicely on top. And I'm just going to be adding these same colors, doing the same process, and then I'll let that dry before we go on to the grass. just a few more brush strokes here. I'm making sure that I have all of the oil pastel activated. And as you can see right now, it's hard to tell the difference between the tree in the front, the trees in the back. They're all kind of clumps, but again, once we get more layers on and I do some color lifting in part 2, you're going to see the individual trees. I'm going to be using, as I said, for those trees in the background, I'm using the same palette for the grass in the foreground. Now our grass does have some cute little purple wildflowers. I'm not saving a space for those. That's going to come in part 2. Because we're working on canvas, all of this color is really easy to lift and move around, very forgiving. And I'm thinking while I'm working on this grass, I'm thinking of the way grass grows. So it's sort of the same brush strokes or pencil strokes or oil pastel strokes that I did for the trees, but they're going to be a little bit more elongated as we come closer because the grass is getting larger. And again, right now, the only thing I'm thinking about is where are the color placements, what are the shapes and the different areas of the grass, and what colors do I need to put down, how are they going to mix well together. So I'm just going to do that all the way through, and then I'm going to put the water on top. My brush strokes in this portion for the grass are a little bit different than what I used for the trees. In the trees, it was more of a circular motion to try to get clumps and to get the colors activated and swirling together. But when I'm coming to the grass is long. It's not in clumps. We have patches where we have different greens and yellows, but the grass is still up and down. So that's the motion I'm going to be using for my brush. And what that's going to do is create rows of grass. And that's going to work well to add some texture. And when we come back and add some more grass pieces on top in part 2. Just a few more brush strokes and then we're going to call this piece good for part 1. I like to let my pieces when I'm working on paintings to set for a day or two, come back with fresh eyes, see what I want to change, see what I want to add to it. There's always a little something I want to tweak. So I hope you will join me for part 2 where I will be finishing this piece and you can see the tweaks and you can see how I add the leaves and separate the trees. So I do appreciate your being here and I hope you will join for part 2. If you have any questions or if you work on watercolor canvas and you have any tips or tricks that you want to share with us down below in the comments, please feel free to do so. Again, thanks so much for being here and I will see you in the next one.